This episode of We Are Libertarians is brought to you by Audible.com. Enjoy one free audiobook courtesy of We Are Libertarians. Choose from more than 100,000 audiobook titles, including works by Ron Paul, Walter Block, Murray Rothbard, and the Cato Institute. Audible.com also has audio of radio and TV programs and audio versions of magazines and newspapers. You can get the Audible app on any mobile device or download the audio to your computer. Go to audibletrial.com/WAL or head to WeareLibertarians.com and find the link to get one free month of Audible today. Welcome to We Are Libertarians for this week. I'm your host, Chris Spangle. Joining me to my right, as almost always, lost the title of Mr. Reliable, but he's back again. Greg Lenz, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. The new Mr. Dependable is to my left. His name is Dan Peppers.
How you doing?
Dan, thank you for being here. And joining us for the first time in a while is our managing editor, Joe Ruiz. Joe, how are you doing?
Good. It has been a while. It's been some time since I've been able to join you guys.
It's been many, many episodes, so glad to have you back. But more importantly than any of us, although let's be egalitarian, as equally as importantly as all of us, Mr. Jeffrey Tucker. Dr. Tucker, how are you doing today?
It's good to be here. I'm doing great. I'm a big fan, so thanks for having me on.
Well, that's very flattering. Trust me. It is... you were on the Shill Report, and I don't know if we put that in the Weird Libertarians feed, so it may be the first time here on the big show. But we really enjoyed our conversation with you last time, and then we also enjoyed having you in Indianapolis. Gosh, how long ago was it? 2 months ago? He was in your apartment, Peppers.
Yeah, I believe it was early December, late November.
Yeah, so hanging out with the Young Americans for Liberty here in Indianapolis, giving a great speech.
I remember the night well. It reminded me of the new, it reminded me of a Miley Cyrus video or something like that.
I'm speaking my language now, Chris.
Yeah, I know.
Who did Peppers twerk on?
Yeah, Peppers, who did you twerk with?
Just Jeffrey.
Just Jeffrey, okay. That's poor man. We invite him on as a guest, and look how we treat him.
It's a We Are Libertarians after party.
Well, you know, Dr. Tucker, you're one of the few libertarians with a sense of humor. It's well documented.
That's a pathetic commentary, actually.
I know, yeah.
But you can call me Jeffrey, by the way. No reason for all the formalities.
Absolutely. All right, Jeffrey. You know, we first and foremost want to talk to you about your new project. We want to talk about liberty.me. And you go to the website, and it's got a splash page where you can sign up. And I know you've put out some videos, but for those who haven't seen it, can you tell us a little bit about the new project?
Yeah, well, it's something I dreamed about for a very long time, mainly because it doesn't exist. It's a complete city in the cloud for socializing, publishing, and content delivery within the Liberty space. I imagine it as a kind of a scalable city in the sense that there are no limits to what can be done here. I've always thought of the digital realm as being a new frontier, and there's really no place on the internet that really makes use of all the tools that are available. So in that sense, it's a technology, which is exciting to me enough. But secondly, it's a kind of a philosophy, too. I've gradually concluded over a very long time that there's very little that we can do to cause government to shrink, to grant us our rights, to give us our liberties. We keep begging, we keep writing, we keep organizing, we keep protesting, we're voting, and nothing seems to work. So looking back at history, if you look at the people who have really obtained their freedom, it's not because it was ever given to them. It's because they took it, and they take it by acting free in their own lives. And we're surrounded by examples of this in our own time, wild efforts at entrepreneurship that are actually undermining state control over the media, over transportation, over money even, and many other areas of life. So the goal of the website is philosophically to inspire people to sort of crowdsource ideas for just getting radical and getting active and making ourselves freer and our own lives. And I believe through creativity and innovation, we can actually accomplish this. When I first thought about the idea, I thought, well, this can't work because, as long as the government's big, we're not free. Actually, that's a defeatist attitude, I think. The more I thought about it, I realized, no, that's just an uncreative point of view. If you get really creative and get really radical and start acting free, cautiously, with prudence, then we can outsmart the state. And so that's really the goal of Liberty.me, is to outsmart the state using massive technology, actually.
Can you give us some specifics? Like, if and when I join, what what features of this technology will be available to me, or is it just sort of a digital playground? I mean, can you give us some specifics, or are you giving specifics yet? I don't want to.
Yeah, there's a number of specifics. We're going to have a mixture of both free and paid content. So on the free side, we've got a complete news stream that's going to be running all the time, a 2 or 3 times a week podcast series, lots of video interviews, and articles that I'm going to be producing daily along with all of our contributors. That's on the free side. So we'll have as much free content as any website ever, actually, vastly more. But then on the paid side, on the subscription model, every single member gets his or her own publishing space with a unique URL within the community. So, I know a lot of really good writers and people with good ideas, and they go out and they start blog spots or WordPresses or dump their stuff on Facebook for it to disappear again. By joining, you actually get a space to publish alongside other liberty-minded people, so you actually get attention for your views. You don't have to worry about search engine optimization. We take care of all that for you. You don't have to worry about design and style sheets and URL structures and all the rest of it that people spend thousands of dollars on. Instead, you join, and suddenly you're right there with all the coolest people. I've got a lot of really good minds involved in publishing, so your published material is published right alongside theirs, and what goes to the front page is entirely determined by a karma system, and I'm subjecting myself to that too.
Very cool.
So, because I want that competition.
Sure. So, when you were on the show report with us, you are the former editor of the Mises Institute. What was your title at Mises?
No, I was vice president, editorial vice president. I was the website builder.
Okay, yeah. Sorry for the demotion there. And you really pioneered putting as much free content out into the universe as humanly possible.
Right.
Can you kind of cover why you felt that was important, and why do you feel that in Liberty.me it's important to warehouse this knowledge and put it out for free?
Well, mainly for me it's not so much a matter of whether it's paid or free, but whether or not it's controlled or not controlled. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way. I don't believe in the use of copyright. Essentially, I think that has slowed down our progress as civilization, and it's a violation of the rights of conscience of individuals to contain ideas within a structure of legal restriction. So I pioneered at Mises the use of Creative Commons publishing technologies, and I continued that at Laissez-Faire, and we're doing that again at Liberty.me. I don't want to use copyright. I don't want to use the state at all and anything. And intellectual property is just a grim use of the state, and I just don't believe in it. Now, we're going to have a lot of content behind the subscription wall. We're going to have a lot outside of it and within it. But within it, none of it's going to be protected by copyright. In fact, I'm looking at, I've got people that are working with me on books and texts and things like that. I'm looking at putting the whole of the contents of the liberty-minded world, from 3 centuries ago to the present, in the most beautiful possible editions. They're going to be out of copyright, and that's going to be within the city structure itself. I should say, too, that there are 2 other aspects to Liberty.me that serve as a kind of a foundation. You also get to be part of a social network that's basically Facebook functionality, but much more. So the live chat, and it'll be encrypted. And you have friendship networks, the ability to start new groups. I'm doing all of this so we can have a scalable model of building friendships and communities. Within that, there'll be job banks and personals and all kinds of stuff. And plus, I really wanted a kind of a communication tool so that everybody could talk as a group and group source knowledge. And of course, the right structure for that is the forums. But I never liked forums. I never liked using them, mainly because they're clunky and they're kind of ugly and hard to use. So I really put a lot of time into getting a designer that could put together forums that wouldn't look anything like any forums you've ever seen. The results are extremely friendly, super duper engaging, and I think it's going to be so inviting that people are going to want to hang out there all the time. I mean, essentially what I want to do is I want to subject myself as a producer to a direct relationship with the consumer, not relying on big nonprofit donors, to dictate our policies of what we're supposed to be thinking, or advertisers, so that, like in Facebook, we're all basically contributing our stuff so that Facebook can earn by click-throughs from large corporate advertisers. I want to get rid of that whole apparatus and have a direct relationship between the producer and consumer. And, in terms of the model here, I just kind of like kept asking myself, can I provide enough value within the city to cause a person to want to spend the equivalent of a mixed drink, a cocktail, once a month? And if I can't do that, I don't figure I need to be in business. So that's what we're shooting for, and that's what we're going for. So far, our campaign fund has gone extremely well. We've raised $80K as of today. Wow. Actually, it's closer to 82 now, plus 71 Bitcoin, which is quite extraordinary. So we've way overshot our goal. But we have 7 days left. I'm hoping that everybody who's even slightly interested in this idea is going to jump in now, because the price is actually cheaper than it will be once we go live in about 5 to 6 weeks.
Well, as someone who just went through a huge web transition at work, Godspeed. So, and just so you know, and we will make the interview on where we went into copyright, where we went into a lot of those subjects. We'll put that back in the feed so people who hear this episode can listen to that next. And we actually here at We Are Libertarians took off all rights reserved, and we went with we basically went to your website and copied what you had at the bottom of your website as far as the copyright goes. So, and if we get questions from time to time, if anybody ever wants to use anything from We Are Libertarians, feel free. We don't mind. Just don't change out my voice and say that it's you or anything. But Greg has a question. It's not the selfies section on the website, is it? Okay.
It is not. It is not the selfies section. I was just trying to kind of clear up the idea in my mind. It sounds like on the paid side, it's a little bit of a combination of the Khan Academy and Quora for Liberty. Or are you familiar with those two services?
I know Khan Academy. Quora, I'm not so much. There's another social network that's a distributed social network called Diaspora.
Oh, yeah. Diaspora.
Yeah, and I looked at Diaspora for us, but it was fine, but a little undeveloped. I wanted something a little more sophisticated, so I used another technology that was available that seemed to it'd be Facebook without the BS, basically.
Yeah.
But you can imagine the technological challenges, and my web designer, my main architect here is the guy I worked with to build Mises.org, and he always taught me that there's a lot to be gained by dreaming big. So we dreamed big at the very outset. I imagined weaving all these things together: social network, forum technologies, publishing systems, and content distribution systems, news delivery, encrypted chat, everything. And just made a big list and said, let's shove all these things together and call it a beginning. And then, and it's been unbelievable from a technological point of view and a design point of view to get all this stuff integrated. But I'm just thrilled. I mean, I wanted to open December, and they were like, okay, you're out of your mind. And then there was January, but actually things have gone very, very fast to build a space of this size. I'm working within it every day and more impressed in what's going on. We still have a few more pieces to get into place, and then we'll go into beta. I'm hoping it'll be March 1st. We're going to be in beta, and then a full launch. And then soon after that. But like I say, there's never been anything like this in our space, and frankly, Liberty deserves it. I mean, I've seen forums and social networks for Cocker Spaniel owners that is more impressive than the websites we have in Liberty Land, and that's just inexcusable.
that was actually one of our guiding principles of We Are Libertarians. I don't know if we have the most beautiful website, but we felt that the libertarian movement couldn't stand one more angry yellow and black website. No offense to our friends who have yellow and black websites, but kick up the design a notch.
Well, one question I have.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one of the strategies I made when I went into Liberty.me, I really wanted the design to be super friendly, a place that you could sort of bear living, be happy with it. I mean, I remember once when I moved into my current house, I didn't like to sit in the living room, and I couldn't figure out why, and it took me about 6 weeks to figure out why. I hated the color of paint on the walls. It was sort of a muddy brown color. I went, oh, God, this has got to go. So I repainted everything this really pretty light yellow and suddenly liked the room. So when I put together the design for Liberty.me, I wanted to make it a place that sort of immediately made me comfortable, relaxed, and happy to hang out there. So the design element is very crucial.
Now, one question I had was Google Plus tried to replace Facebook, and it's not going very well. And one of the big reasons is and it's a good platform and all, but people just aren't on it. I am on Facebook because all my friends are on Facebook, and a social network without that is kind of difficult. And this seems like a significant problem, something that campusreform.org has already run into. I was just wondering what your plan was for overcoming this.
I've learned long ago that it really doesn't serve any purpose to try to replace a very popular technology that's already networked. I have no desire in replacing Facebook. What I want to do is provide a value on top of it. So I've got full Facebook integration. So you can live and hang out on liberty.me and still feed your Facebook and still work with Facebook. I'm not waging a war on that front, but I'm hoping that people are going to find liberty.me valuable enough so they can make it a primary place to publish, but it'll interface very, very, very well with Facebook. So I agree with you about that. I think this is a great problem with Google Plus, is it tried to become a direct competitor, and it doesn't like Facebook. And in fact, they don't work together. So I want to work together with everybody. Which by the way, brings another point here. As a in the liberty space, we know we have tons of factions, right? I mean, there's some high walls out there. I was reflecting on this the other day, because I have lots of objectivist friends and many left anarchist friends, and also many sort of right anarchist friends, and some constitutionalist friends. But none of them get along. And I don't really understand this, because there's really no necessary reason why this would be true. I just the other day read Murray Rothbard's initial review of Atlas Shrugged, and it was over the top. I mean, he called it not only the greatest novel ever written, but possibly the greatest book ever written. Okay, so I mean, there was a time when people who loved liberty could have lots of disagreements, but still appreciate each other's contribution and learn from each other. I mean, and maybe I'm just a dreamer enough to believe that could still be true today. I want to break down some of these silos and break down some of these walls and get people talking to each other. Because really, it's not about fighting over doctrine. I'm really kind of tired of doing that. What I'd like to do is come together and be creative together to try to figure out ways to be freer and to be more innovative and try to break down the thing that's the real enemy, which is the state. You know, it's like in Catching Fire and the Hunger Games. You know, they keep reminding each other, remember who the real enemy is. It's not the other people that seem to be fighting in the woods. It's actually the people that sent them there to fight each other in the first place. That's the real target. So I'd like to kind of refocus the agenda of the liberty world over onto the real enemy, which is the government, and the real solution, which is human liberty, and stop this endless attacking each other in such a silly way. Now, that's probably going to be the biggest challenge. It's not technological. It's not even philosophical. It's kind of strategic and a matter of inspiring people towards a certain level of civility. I'm looking forward to that. That could be amazing. Now, in terms of the numbers, I already have 1,600, actually, as of this morning, about 1,800 active members in Liberty Me already. That's already a very, very large community. So I'm not really at this point concerned about this being a kind of an empty city. I mean, it's already pretty big, but my target is 10,000 is when I'm really going to be pulling the champagne corks.
Well, good luck with that. And one big question I have is, you're a big fan of Creative Commons and open source and whatnot. I was just wondering if your platform was going to be open source for this.
Yeah, in fact, we're using all open source technology, and none of it's proprietary. Now, I've got a design, but of course anybody can copy a design, you know. So it's just like anybody can copy my bow tie. So, and it can't be copyrighted. I don't see why anybody can't copy a design. So yeah, everything will be entirely open source. Yeah, you know, it's very interesting to me. I've reflected a lot on this, because there's nothing necessarily coercive about a proprietary technology if you're not using force to protect it. On the other hand, I think ultimately subjecting yourself to a kind of competition and a culture of sharing is better for everybody in the end. I think there's a reason why open source technology seems to be either neck and neck or even just slightly beating all the proprietary technologies of Mac and Windows out there. I mean, there's a reason why Linux is the world's leading server, why WordPress is the leading platform for websites. I mean, I think there's something to say. There's a special power to open source, and I don't want to close myself off. I mean, by the way, this is the same reason I want to publish alongside everybody else. I want to be subjected. Like if I wake up on Monday morning and write a crappy article, and you write a great article, I want you to be on the front page and me to be buried. I mean, I need that. I mean, I want to be amazing every day. But the only way we can be amazing every day is if we have some standards and some way to subject ourselves to a kind of a karma system, or help invite our peers to judge our work. So I want to do that too, because I want to maintain my edge as a writer. I just don't want to, live off Bourbon for Breakfast or Jetson's World or Beautiful Anarchy forever. I want to do something ever more amazing every day, and I think really the only way to do that is by competing.
One question before we jump to Joe. Sometimes the problem with forums and groups and Facebook and a lot of these open communities is the way that we talk to each other. And I know we've had a conversation, as folks will hear in the other podcast, about the way that libertarians talk to each other, especially. Like it's cutthroat. Are you going to have a mod system? Free speech is protected by the government, but in a community like this, it's okay to set standards, in my opinion. And I wondered how you felt about that.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. I had a lot of experience in running forums when the Mises Institute used to have them. I implemented them, and I got to know how forums worked. I remember when we first made them live, and everybody started screaming at each other, and everybody's feelings were hurt, and there was flame wars. I didn't know what to do. So I read a book called How to Run a Forum, and I learned how to do it. And the key is that you have to establish the culture going into it and try to inspire people to be tolerant of differences. A lot of what seems to be ideological differences are actually just personality differences, different ways of approaching problems. And if we can learn that lesson, we'll all get along a lot better. I managed to be able to create a really vibrant and happy culture at the Mises forums. Actually, it took a little while, and there were always problems that would come up. Like newbies would just show up and start flaming everybody, and people would try to gently instruct them. Quite often, just a little bit of a human touch can civilize people. We all know that the internet can sometimes draw the worst out of people. By the way, this happens to me all the time. I mean, almost every few days, where on my Facebook account somebody will like drive by flame me, with some crazy insult, and I can just overlook it and it's easy enough to do it. But sometimes what I actually do is I'll click on the name and just message the person to say, whoa, did I do something? If so, let me apologize in advance, for offending you in some way. And I can't think of a single time when the person didn't write back and go, oh, listen, it's just one of those mornings. I'm really embarrassed I said that.
Yeah, that's totally. It's the free exchange of ideas is what should be fostered, not a forum for you to express your own mental pathologies. I mean, it really is bizarre how people talk to each other. I mean, I literally just deleted a thread on a page that I manage because people kept saying the N-word. It's like, do you think that's funny? I mean, it's not funny. It's not. It doesn't contribute to the discussion in any way. I don't understand. People just opening their brain and letting all kinds of nonsense leak out.
I agree with that. I really believe in standards of civility. I mean, I mean, it's been very interesting, actually. If you think about the 20th century as the century of the state, I do think it's very interesting that there's been a habit of replacing the old codes of manners and civility that were alive, all the way through, the Middle Ages, all the way to the late Victorian period. Suddenly, with World War I, all that kind of got wiped out. So now, people don't have a basic structure of how to engage each other normally and with civility and with gentleness and kindness anymore. I think that's a consequence of statism, actually. But look, what do we do about that? I mean, we have it within our own power to be decent people. And to me, being a decent person and being civil and being, abiding by some simple standards of etiquette is a great way to fight back against the brutality, coercive apparatus of the state. So it's just one in many ways that we can actually, obtain liberty in our own lives by being a decent person, actually.
Joseph?
Excuse me, Jeffrey. I love the idea of liberty.me as far as being a city where, everyone's kind of like-minded and shares the free exchange of ideas. But my concern initially was how is it in terms of, I guess, evangelizing to potential liberty thinkers. People, I think when you mentioned Facebook and how things disappear, we often, when we put things there, yes, they do disappear, but realistically, we're hoping that someone will see it and someone will care. Is liberty.me just not the place for, people who don't think like us yet, but could, or is there, I guess, an outreach to it as well?
Well, one thing is that all the published content from members, including me, is going to be entirely public. So, you've got potentially hundreds of articles appearing within this space per day that are going to be flooding the world in the highest possible SEO there is. So, in some sense, this is the greatest evangelistic tool you can ever imagine. I mean, this is a heck of a lot better than having, 10,000 separate blogs that nobody reads. Have one space where you have 10,000 posters and people who are making their content public. It's much more accessible that way. So it's a great outreach tool. So there's that. The other thing, you mentioned about Facebook. One of the weird things that's happened to Facebook is that you have absolutely no control over who sees your content. You post and you're just like hoping somebody will see it. Even your good friend's newsfeed is likely to exclude you. And this is the tool by which Facebook is controlling the content flow, and is carefully calibrating it to accord with its advertising goals too. So we're dumping this stuff on there all the time, and I'm top person who does this, really. I'm posting on Facebook constantly. But I'm also aware that I think I'm reaching people, but I may or may not. It's a complete crapshoot. Whereas on liberty.me, you can have an absolute certainty that everything you post is going to be accessible, outside some weird proprietary framework and inside a world where all of your friends are there, and so you can actually, have some control of what happens to your content. I think that's extremely important, and it's going to change the way we think about our publishing strategies as individuals. I'm almost sure of that. I'm kind of being tired of subjected to all kinds of gatekeepers. And this was a driving force for me for the creation of this platform. I want to be able to write something and push submit and have it appear and be archived and be accessible to the world. That's really, really important. And you'd think that in the World Wide Web today, in the liberty space, that that this would be possible. But I really have not really found a place where that's not true. And the problem with editors, actually, is that they mostly lack imagination. They're agenda-driven. So you have to fit in with their goals in order to get past them. And if you don't, if it's too creative and too outrageous an idea, it's not going to get through. And I don't think that's good for us. Actually, we end up just repeating the same things over and over again. I'm quite frankly just tired of it. I want to see new ideas, new innovative strategies, and even if it kind of feels like a Wild West, which it's going to, actually, so let's hope it will. That's what I want. I want new and challenging things. And by the way, when I talk about civility, I don't mean people can't argue with me. I'm all for argument, but I just I'm hoping that we can actually come to terms with the fact that we all disagree and still be able to have productive exchange with each other.
Our resident minarchist, Greg Lins, here has a question for you about that argument, actually.
I do. Does that worry you about the possible existence of an anarchist society when you see how... I've been a victim of it quite a bit since I am kind of I'm jokingly referred to as the scumbag Republican, so I get a lot of hate mail. But that makes me question the existence of it, and I hope for it, and I pursue it. But I'm not positive it can happen just when I see things like incredibly mean and hurtful comments on a given post on Facebook. Or sure. I see the existence of websites like 4chan. I'm not entirely sure I want anarchy.
Right. Well, one thing is that the terms of use are definitely going to be careful about things like hate speech and that sort of thing. I'm just not into that. I don't want anything going on in the community that's going to draw down the value of the overall structure of the community. At the same time, I have to tell you, there's a reason why most nonprofit organizations don't allow things like multi-site blogging and forums. And it's a kind of an excessive control freakism at the top. They really are worried about people having a voice. My whole experience in the digital world is that this is just generally a mistake. If you set up rules well and you have a good structure of publishing and a nice, solid culture that inspires people to do their best, freedom becomes the most productive, most glorious thing. I always think that people make a mistake in the direction of wanting to control too much and don't trust the value of freedom enough, again, within a structure of rules. So I'm actually not worried about it. I feel like I've had a lot of experience in these kind of rule-based anarchism worlds. I mean, on a much more truncated level in the past. All I'm doing is taking that success and expanding it out and making it the whole basis of the entire community. It's a wild and interesting experiment, but I'm very confident about it. What I'm trying to tap into is the old liberal sentiment that essentially society runs itself, that we can actually build something wonderful and beautiful that's scalable and ever more fabulous without, anything like a coercive apparatus, that we can do it within the structure of manners, etiquette, terms of use, and that sort of thing, non-coercive strategies to build a complete liberal society in the digital cloud.
It kind of sounds like
that's the vision. I believe it can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like then, I guess Adam Smith's the guiding hand of the free market, where there's not necessarily laws, but there are rules and codes of conduct that are to be adhered to, and it will organically develop out of that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's another aspect to this, too. I think one of the reasons why libertarians argue with each other all the time is that we don't have anything else to do. And I think if we change the topic away from constantly arguing about high theory over to practical aspects of dealing with the police, getting into alternative monies, personal power generation, or how do you live freely and independently in an urban environment? Should you rent? Should you own? Should you go to college? Should you not? Is a student loan something you want? All these kinds of practical issues. Here's my new technology for ferreting out whether or not you're being currently spied on online and how to get rid of it, how to use a Tor browser. I mean, all these kinds of things. If we can get over to practicalities of living a freer life, I suspect that we're going to have a more productive exchange with each other rather than just keeping it on high theory. I think this is a major reason why libertarians argue with each other, is that most libertarians are just despairing. They figure that they're kind of useless and worthless and there's nothing we can do. So why don't we just hate on each other instead? But if we change the conversation around to living a freer life and finding productive ways to obtain freedom outside the state, then I'm expecting that we're going to have more productive exchanges. We're going to find that we learn more through friendship than through casting each other out in excommunications.
All right, before we move on to, we're going to cover a couple topics that will segue next into the NSA, and then we'll talk about civil rights after that. Joe has a quick question, one last question about liberty.me, Jeffrey Tucker's new project.
Jeffrey, is there room for only individuals within the confines of the community, or is there a way for an organization like We Are Libertarians to kind of share an apartment?
Right. These are great questions. I'm so happy about these questions because I love talking about the technology. Yeah, we've got group functionality too. So, for example, I've already established some real estate for fee.liberty.me and ihs.liberty.me and so on. So every group, and you're certainly welcome, will have their own space. So again, you know about all the effort and work you went into creating your URL structure and your website, and getting the SEO up, and you're watching traffic, and it's obsessive, and sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. I mean, you've done all this stuff, and that's great, and I know a lot of people who have. But in the future, I would just rather people have a turnkey solution. You've got a new group, you've got a nice salon. Well, just move into our space. Like I say, you shell out $10 a month, and everything's taken care of, and SEO is included in the package. So you will definitely be seen, you will definitely be heard, and you can immediately start publishing. And God, you just save countless hours with this kind of strategy. I mean, again, there's nothing like this, as far as I know, in the Liberty space. So this is a major, major service.
Yeah,
group functionality.
I can tell you, I mean, here at WeAreLibertarians.com, at any given point, it's been up to 20, 25 hours a week of work, just putting things together, keeping things afloat, broadcasting, doing all that. We do it because we enjoy it. It's our hobby. But a lot of people don't have the technological skill that frankly, I built this website and did all this stuff so I could learn how to do it, and helped me get a very nice job because I had taught myself how to do this stuff. But not everybody has that kind of time or desire. So I think it sounds fantastic. So check it out. Sign up at liberty.me and take a look. So you mentioned the NSA and you mentioned secure browsers, and I know there's a very simple question to this, but I want to explore the idea amongst the four of us about what an NSA-less world looks like. So I've always been told by several friends in the security apparatus that you've got to have something like the NSA to protect us from... In this new internet age, the next battlefront is actually the war on the internet, where China and Russia are sending bugs to the United States, and things were getting hacked. Stores like Target need the NSA to help protect them from getting hacked and having our credit cards stolen. So I want to start with Jeffrey Tucker and ask him what an NSA-less world looks like. So how do you fight cyber terrorism and terrorism in general if you don't have an overarching NSA or spying agency? How do we protect ourselves from terrorism in this day and age?
Well, the NSA has never protected anyone from terrorism. That's the first thing. It always amuses me that they construct these gigantic apparatuses. It's been around for 40-some-odd years. I forget now when the NSA was established, but it's been doing the NSA thing all along. And then suddenly one day they go, oh, look, we've got a terrible problem with cyber terrorism. We've got to give the government more power to deal with it. Well, why didn't you deal with it while you had all this power all along? I mean, evidently the NSA has not been even slightly useful for dealing with this problem they claim is so massive. At the same time, my own view is that it's up to Target, it's up to iTunes, and it's up to the corporate world itself to secure its own data. You can't rely on the government to do that. I don't think the NSA adds any value whatsoever. I mean, NSA is doing what governments have always done, which is spy on its citizens. That's what governments do. I mean, they've been doing that for a very long time. I mean, that's why Mary and Joseph had to slog to Bethlehem, because they had to, register and let their names be known so they could be taxed. I mean, this is what it's all about in the end. They spy on us so they can control us and get our money. So I don't worry about an NSA-less world. I'm actually extremely encouraged by the public outrage towards these NSA revelations, because they're not really revelations, really. I mean, if you think about it, we know the government likes to spy on people. All governments, all times and places have done it. But now people are sick of it. There's a reason Rand Paul is using this as a major political issue right now, because it's extremely popular. People are so upset. And, even the New York Times blasted Obama after his ridiculous speech the other day. People are just sick of it. They want more controls. And on the other hand, the idea that we're going to get legislation to control the NSA is crazy. We have to just get rid of it entirely, which we're not going to do. It's going to continue to be around, which is why we need innovations that continue to stay ahead of things. That's what Bitcoin is. That's what Tor is, and there are many other solutions out there.
What
we
was
have
that
to be able to have private lives.
What was that last thing that you just mentioned? I recognize Bitcoin, but what is the other?
The Tor browser, Tor.
Okay. Can you? I know a little bit about it, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an IP scrambling technology that you log on to it. I mean, this is how, if you know anybody in China who's on Facebook, it's because they're using Tor. You get on there and it scrambles your IP. Nobody can know who you are. It bounces all over the world, and it'll not basically anonymizes who you are, more or less, if there is such a thing as perfect anonymity. Tor comes very close to achieving that. It's a brilliant technology. Everybody needs to have it. Not that you have to use it all the time, but it's a very helpful tool.
The closest you can come to pure anonymity, it's being on the We Are Libertarians podcast. Thank you. Rimshot, please. Dan Peffers.
Now, how robust of a system do you believe Tor is? Do you think that Tor has any fundamental weaknesses that leave users open to being found out by the NSA, or do you think that this is a great idea to overcome the NSA's ability to spy by just overwhelming their servers with just a bunch of data that's going to take too long to process?
Yeah, nothing is going to ever be entirely secure, and in the end, if the state puts its spotlight on you, you're dead. Whether you use a Tor browser or Internet Explorer, it just not going to matter. But it's a very, very helpful tool. I mean, this is the way Silk Road was able to exist for years and not be shut down. And the way the Silk Road was shut down was actually very sort of, I mean, the story behind how that they finally closed it is pretty interesting. They grabbed him in a public library. Grabbed Ross Ulbricht in a public library, who was at the time adminning the thing, and prevented him from closing down his laptop, and was able to steal the user database. But very few users of Silk Road, even though they were caught in the middle of transactions, were ever contacted at all. Actually, it's just been the top few players. But there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people. But because they were using Bitcoin, because they were using Tor, we're completely safe. That's very revealing.
Even back in the peer-to-peer, in the heyday of Napster, in the heyday of you still have BitTorrent. They constantly are threatening people that we're going to get you. They made an example out of one kid and charged him like almost $1 million for all of his downloading. But by and large, it's been scare tactics. And the only people that really have ever, they've closed down Napster. They closed down the Kim.com guy. He's successfully remained out of prison. So it doesn't seem like there is a lot of, the user of these services aren't really in that much danger.
No, and what's funny is every time they shut down one of these technologies, it's like it advertises it to the world. There are a lot of people that didn't know about the possibilities of Silk Road until after it was shut down. Now there's half a dozen or even a dozen similar services that have popped up since they shut that down. And it was the same thing with file sharing. When they shut down Napster, it was like, oh, look, here's a bad guy who figured out a way to have a distributed network to distribute music all over the world, and made it invulnerable to being shut down through these BitTorrents. Well, that was the beginning of file sharing, not the end of file sharing. And the same thing with Kim.com. He's back with a bigger, more wonderful service than ever. It's going to be the same thing with Silk Road. And by the way, here's a great example of that. About 8 years ago, the FBI went on a huge raid against online pharmacies. And said, look, there's a lot of bad guys out there that are selling drugs to millions of people without prescriptions and making a ton of money doing it. And so they shut down a bunch of websites. Now, I don't know what the deal is, but online pharmacies are everywhere, super convenient, a fifth the price of CVS and Walgreens, and they all taking Bitcoin. They're taking regular credit cards now, and nobody knows what to do about it. It's a very interesting thing. It's like it's weird. It's like every time the government goes after something and has a big public raid and shuts something down, it's like it's a green light to the market. Like, let's go, and then suddenly there's thousands of other services that pop up. It's like they're advertising the technology every time they shut something down. Yeah. It's so amusing to me how the digital age is making such a mockery of the ability of the government to control things.
Yeah, and before I throw it to Greg, one question for our listeners to think about. I downloaded a lot of music on Napster back 10 years ago, maybe.
I admit to nothing.
A lot. And you know why? You know why I buy music now is because after all these years, the only music out of all of that I have left over is stuff I bought on iTunes or on CD. And so it really seems like a whole lot of hoopla for nothing. But Greg, what are your thoughts on an NSA-less society?
The way to, in my opinion, to combat the NSA is not through legislation and trying to restrict its power. That's futile. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I do think that the reason the NSA exists is, for whatever reason, citizens decided it was too hard to maintain their own security, so they essentially outsourced it to the government. And so what we need is, instead of seeing the need for an NSA, we turn the NSA around on itself, where we have 350 million American citizens. If they're going to consistently spy on us, we should in fact go ahead and turn around the spying apparatus on them. Archive every interaction with law enforcement. Record it. Document it. Take it before an attorney. Eventually they will be so sick of being spied on, they will in fact come to the negotiating table to an extent. And then the other thing I see is I think the government learned from the Silk Road raid. I think they learned that by cutting the head off the snake and 10,000 more, like Jeffrey was talking about, that was a strategic mistake. And so that scares me. I think instead what they're going to start doing is allowing one big one to exist, covertly taking those types of organizations over. They become, in fact, the supplier and the government in one, and that's how they will catch you.
You actually had a term for the spying on the spy, watching the watchers, essentially.
Yeah, it was just an idea I was kicking around with you called the Liberty Panopticon, where we would turn it around on the NSA.
And can you explain what the Panopticon is?
Yeah, it was by Jeremy Bentham, a utilitarian theorist, and what it was a way for one person within a prison to watch every single prisoner within the cells.
Yeah, so there's your nerd fact of the day.
Yeah. Do you hear all those ladies cheering in the background?
What do you think about that? Could that be a part of Liberty.me where there is a watching the watchers section?
Well, I don't know. I think that's brilliant. I have police friends of mine who are liberty-loving with difficult relations with their own police departments who's tell me that the most important thing that individuals can do is be ready to document everything that happens with their interaction with the state, and that if you have the knowledge, then you have a fighting chance of beating them. So it sounds absolutely right to me. There are tools already being developed to know who's spying on you, when, and where. I mean, it's funny, but from my own point of view, I mean, when the Dread Pirate Roberts was arrested, immediately or the purported to be Dread Pirate Roberts was arrested, I went to my email archive and found a really nice correspondence with the gentleman in question. And I immediately knew, okay, the NSA is reading every email, And I mean, I don't like that, but it also kind of amuses me in some way. I hope they're learning something, is all I can say. But it's never stopped me. It's never really intimidated me. If I really have to send something private, I use BitMessage. But otherwise, I just assume that email is a public medium and that they're watching me. And maybe I should be more scared than I am, but I just don't know. Really, it's one of the strange things about libertarianism that I don't entirely like, is that once a person becomes aware of the existence of the state and its evil, people do tend to shrink back in a kind of horror and fear and disgruntlement and cynicism and hide and become paranoid and miserable. I mean, that's not actually very good, really. I mean, I think a lot of times libertarians actually exaggerate the power of the government. We have to remember that it's mostly just, what is the state? I mean, mostly it's elected politicians whose big job is getting reelected again. That's the main thing. Or judges that are sort of career ambitious, or White House employees who are just looking to, write best-selling books after the fact, or government bureaucrats who have 9-to-5 jobs like the rest of us, and are mostly kind of miserable. I mean, I've seen polls where government bureaucrats are the most miserable workers, and it's true. If you can go into Washington at lunchtime outside of any of the major bureaucracies and talk to a person eating his or her lunch on a park bench and say, how do you like their job? They'll tell you it's the most miserable thing in their whole lives. They hate it. So, I mean, the state is not actually a very amazing institution in any way. Mostly it's kind of like really vulnerable.
Whoops. Very professional. I had my mic off. We talked with Walter Block last week about this, where, I had an argument with somebody on Facebook, and they were saying, a libertarian paradise, can you imagine what that looked like in West Virginia? Oh, there'd be 3 times the amount of chemicals spilled in the river. And I said, well, you have your fairy tale magical government, and the EPA didn't protect you, and the West Virginia government didn't protect you, and the federal government didn't protect you. So why are you blaming it on us when you're the one who has all this magical government that can solve all of this? And they didn't really have an answer. I just needed to get educated because I was an a-hole. So that was their response, which, please, hey, what can I do? But I do think that a lot of times the response is not anger. It should be more laughter. It really, we need more people, more libertarians like Tim Slagle, the comedian, than we do another angry pundit, and just look at their ineffectuality at everything.
Well, also you notice that some of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time are actually influenced by libertarian ideas. I mean, certainly this is true of Steve Jobs, but the CEO of Uber. I mean, the guy who's running Overstock right now, who jumped into the Bitcoin realm, just last week, totally committed to the ideas of liberty. I mean, there's a huge number of dedicated libertarians who are running big companies now. And you know what? You can't be an entrepreneur and have a despairing view of the future. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've got to look at the uncertainty of the future with a sense of hope and a desire to build something that doesn't yet exist. You've got to believe in your dream and see a future that's bright and beautiful and something that you can change through your own actions. And I think that should be the right attitude of every liberty-loving person, to see the future as something that is on our side. And I would like to see a little bit more of that, and a little less hand-wringing and, as you say, angry punditry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. There's a lot of horrible things going on in the world. The question is whether or not that anger is going to be enough to change the future, and I don't believe it is.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly. I could not agree with that more. What I see so much is the libertarian position is hard when you're having, let's say, an online discussion, because it's the negation of the existing framework. And so what I really am focused on, I doubt you've read any of my writing, and I would not recommend it because it's very bad. However, I try to focus on not necessarily policy solutions, but building out alternatives that are readily imaginable, that people can say, oh, well, that's not necessarily why do we need the state, and let's just all leave it alone. It's, well, the state's gone, but what would an anarcho-capitalist provider of government services look like? Or not government services, but you know what I mean, replacement services look like. What does that look like? Because I feel like the only way people actually learn and come around is through almost metaphor. They grab onto the existence of maybe, oh, well, that does sort of make sense. Let me investigate that. And that slowly draws them in.
Yeah, I think it's true. You have to. Somebody always says to me, a friend of mine always says to me that in the face of gravity, do you just curse physical reality, or do you build an airplane? You know,
Brilliant.
Invent the airplane to get her. And I think that's the way libertarians need to be thinking these days. It's a horrible thing to live in the presence of Leviathan. The question is, what are you going to do about it? You know, are you just going to curse it for the rest of your life and die sad? Or are you going to try to strive to give yourself a better life and make the world a better place?
Most of us are going to die sad and miserable alone. But there's no reason that you have to do it on purpose. Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, it was more about Jeffrey, about your demeanor as you guys sat there and had that conversation. It reminded me of an interaction we had on Twitter a bit ago when I posted that you were going to be joining us this evening, and I asked if anyone had any questions that they would like us to ask you, and one person jokingly said, "Can you ask him why he's always so cheerful?" And is that something that, is that just kind of your natural personality, or do you kind of make it a mission to be that person because you feel like that's more effective? You're like my libertarian Tony Robbins. I just want to bottle up your sentiment sometimes and save it for a rainy day, you know?
Your head is not nearly as big, though.
But, it's a little bit funny you would ask me that, because people always say, oh, you're cheerful, you're optimistic. This is not an affectation. This is just what I take people for granted, that this is what they're saying about me. It's not anything I really try to be. It's true that when I was a kid, my teachers used to always tell me that I was always singing all the time and always very, very happy and thinking about happy, cool stuff. And that's true. So maybe it is just a temperament issue. But also, I was very much influenced by Murray Rothbard. I was very good friends with him for about 10 years. And I just don't. Murray, but he had a very hopeful outlook on life, and is very joyful. To him, to love liberty was the thing that gave him his heart and his mind and his joy and his happy outlook. And I guess I learned from that also. It really has to do with whether or not how you look at the world. You love liberty. You begin to notice things around you didn't see before. You can marvel at the fact that this restaurant is able to survive in the face of massive taxation and regulation and still overcome everything. You can get a certain joy out of that, or you can go to the park and just see people running their dogs and seeing them talk to each other and thrill over the existence of the spontaneity of human interaction, or just be happy to see rooftop bar scenes with such complicated worlds of conversation taking place and everybody achieving a sort of orderly existence despite the lack of central planning.
Yeah.
So all these things are just wonderful to observe. And, if you can take joy in that, it's really hard not to be happy about life. I look around me and I see the elites constantly being subverted by regular people in their daily lives and their regular actions and their choices. And that gives me a great sense. I mean, it's great. Like, I feel like I see revolutions taking place everywhere. And if you can develop that eye, then you can actually take great delight in daily life. And certainly that's what the ideas of liberty have done for me.
I thought about you a couple days ago, actually, late last week, because I'm always amused whenever you post on your Facebook your amusement or your wonderment at technology. Doing a Google Hangout on a plane. I was on my iPhone and I had remoted into a computer that was remoting into another computer. And I was on my iPhone working on 2 computers away, and I was just like, you know what, Jeffrey Tucker is right. It was fascinating. I have a question about Murray, because, you mentioned his positive side, but, if you got into his crosshairs, you really, he was like a tiger with red meat. He does have a bit of a reputation. And I wondered, because you have that different view that is, than what some people will say of Murray. He also caused a lot of discord amongst groups between, like Ed Crane and Cato, for instance. I read a 1970s thing that he had put out where he was calling them the Craniacs, and they were destroying the libertarian movement. There was that aspect to Rothbard, and some of those strains, I think, still persist today. I mean, how do you reconcile that? I mean, I guess everybody has different characters, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts when, he was that mercurial person.
Yeah, I think you've kind of expressed it well, actually. I saw him behave different ways towards different forms of, I guess he would call it deviations, like sometimes a person who was not in his camp at all, but was nonetheless a great scholar, he would celebrate their achievement and become really good friends with them and be really complimentary of their work. And then other times a person would disagree with him, and you're right, he would kind of be a very severe critic. I think a lot of it had to do with the direction they're moving. It always kind of made him sad whenever he saw people who had a consciousness of what he would consider the full science of liberty, who then would back away from it for maybe career reasons or some other reason like that. And that always made him sad, and he would try to do his best to persuade them otherwise, and then to let other people know that they shouldn't be following that path. So there's an element of that there. I kind of consider that temperament to be a little bit part of the old world in a way. I mean, we live in new times. Before 1995, we didn't have a lot of access to each other. We didn't have many publishing outlets. We had to all kind of scramble for whatever information we had. It was kind of the dark ages in a way as compared to now. Now we live in a world of a sea of information. We're being showered by different ideas all the time. And I think despite what appears to be on Facebook and other venues that the people are really fighting with each other a lot, I don't think that's true. I think people are fighting a lot less because we're learning that there's a lot of points of view in the world and a lot of different ways to look at the same issue, and we have a lot to learn from people with whom we disagree. So I consider some of that what you identified as a sort of factional impulse in Murray to be a little bit part of his times, I would say. The other factor is that he was very much involved in the Libertarian Party, right? And parties are weird. It's like they want everybody kind of marching in the same direction. And it's especially strange to talk about a Libertarian Party because, I mean, Libertarians don't want to march in the same direction. So,
yep.
That's a factor there, too. A lot of his factionalism and things that Murray were engaged in were basically over the messaging of Libertarian Party, which is always going to be a problem when you have a political party.
I got to tell you, I've been out of electoral politics for over a year now, and my life has been so much more peaceful. I was the executive director of the Libertarian Party of Indiana, Jeffrey, and herding cats is a tough business to be in.
I'm getting the impression that the Libertarian Party these days is much more of a kind of a social group and an ideologically educating kind of group, and I'm really happy about that. In fact, I'm sure of it. I'm speaking for the I'm one of the headline speakers for the Libertarian Party National Convention this year, and I'm kind of glad to be doing it. It amuses me because I'm kind of like famously unpolitical in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move on to our last subject here, because we're a little pressed for time. But today is Martin Luther King Day. It's observed here in America to honor Dr. King, and he is one of my great heroes. He brought about social change. And he was outside of the government. He used the government. He pressured government officials. He was nonviolent, but then yet he used those that were violent to his means. For instance, and a professor actually got fired for saying the truth. He would go to the sheriff of a town where they were having a march and say, "Listen, my people are nonviolent. They're not going to hurt anybody. They're peaceful, but." Those people on the outside of town, I can't speak for them. All I know is that if you give us trouble, then those people or those maniacs are going to run in and attack. But so that was one. He was a great mover of people. He was maybe the greatest speaker, maybe in the history of the world. I mean, I don't know if that's over exaggerating, but. I don't know if over-exaggerating is over-exaggerating, but I'll get a language lesson from Jeffrey after the show here. But he just was, I think, the civil rights movement of the 60s. Every libertarian ought to take a break from Misesian economics and take a look at Taylor Branch's 3 books on the civil rights movement to have an appreciation for nonviolent, non-political social change. And I wondered what everybody's thoughts on Martin Luther King and that being a model for us in this day and age. Let's start with Jeffrey.
So today I reread this morning the letter from Birmingham jail because it was published on fee.org and they made it really easy for me. And the thing that jumped out at me, it just leapt out of that text, is he said it's up to us to judge the law. It's up to the individual citizens to stand in judgment over whether any law is just or unjust, and that we have no moral obligation to obey unjust laws. And he lays out very clear terms about what laws are consistent with justice and those which are not. And he says if a law brings about the flourishing of the human person, and is consistent with human freedom, then it's a just law. If it attacks the flourishing of the human personality and attacks human freedom, as an unjust law and has no business being here, and it should be violated, and we should be willing to pay the price for it. Now, look, for a man of his stature and his position in history to come out and say something as radical as that, to say the state is not the final arbiter of justice, it is not the arbiter of morality, and that we as citizens have no obligation to obey laws that are contrary to justice, is totally wonderful. That is a brilliant letter. I highly recommend it to everybody. It just gave me, it gave me a jolt reading it again this morning. I was very moved by it and very touched by it.
I think there's a lot to learn, and I think that civil disobedience is an important part of it, but I kind of see it as I know I've talked before about a multi-front war. I think there definitely is a need where the civil disobedience will be more of the incrementalist approach in trying to get more liberties back. It's the people who aren't necessarily willing to march with Adam Kokesh on an armed march around Washington, D.C. But then also those individuals are similar to the ones you were talking about with Dr. King. The ones that, we can't necessarily control, but they also have merits to their approach because they're kind of the rabid dog that can be let loose. And then you also have the intellectual leaders like Dr. King with his letter, perfect example, the letters from Birmingham jail. That's what Murray Rothbard's done. That's what any liberty-minded writer is doing. They influence the intellectual. They go for the popular opinion through civil disobedience. And then you have that sort of rabid dog group that's a little bit more active, I guess it would be a good word, in working towards the war on liberty.
Yeah, I think we in the libertarian movement, we have that as well, and I think we just, because we're in the heat of it, we don't recognize it the way that we now recognize it in the civil rights movement. People like Malcolm X, people like Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King Jr., they had different approaches, they had different ideas, but they had one common goal, and the end result certainly was going to be different if you're Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., but they recognized that they were working towards a common thing, and they had a common, somebody like a Bull Connor is their common enemy, George Wallace is their common enemy, and, don't worry about every detail of the end, don't worry about every detail of the tactic, try and find ways to work together. That didn't always happen, and maybe we in our movement can learn from that. Greg?
My real question, as far as the progress of the Liberty movement, which is clearly, gaining steam, is whether Edward Snowden is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Claudette Colvin, or is she Rosa Parks in the movement for more liberty. Claudette Colvin was a young high school girl that was arrested on a bus for resisting the busing laws in Alabama. She was, I think, a teenager, I believe, and she was pregnant, and she did not, in fact, become the leader of the civil rights, or the icon of the civil rights movement that Rosa Parks did. And it was, part of it was her personal story, was what didn't allow her to be held up as a symbol. But once Rosa Parks was, that's when it really gained steam, and you had the sit-ins in Greensboro.
Well, Rosa Parks was a well-known organizer for civil rights and libertarian rights, civil rights in that day and age, and she was connected to a lot of the leading figures. What happened to Rosa Parks happened to many people trying to make a statement. It's Rosa who just kind of caught on fire. It's not to belittle what she did at all. It's just she's the story we recognize, and she is the very common refrain from that time. Yeah,
she was like the tipping point of the civil rights movement. Like, right. You could say, like Malcolm Gladwell. But that's my question: is Snowden one of the other ones, or are we at the point where that's the tipping point of? Privacy to me is the first step of really implementing getting more liberty back. But is he too late, or is he too early?
I don't know. Anyone have thoughts on that? I would say that Edward Snowden is, if you look at the civil rights movement, it happened over a period of decades, and it wasn't just one. Rosa Parks didn't light the entire fire. You had leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. who, everybody had their different factions and they played their different roles. I think Edward Snowden plays a part in the fight for privacy, and I've said for the last 10 years now that privacy is the next civil rights battle. That we've come a long way in civil rights for minorities and for gay rights, and the next major battle that we'll have to fight is for our civil liberties and for privacy. And I have no doubt that we can win that battle if we're all vigilant. And I think Edward Snowden is the tinder or the logs, but he's not the match yet. I just don't think that the match has been lit to start motivating people to take it as seriously as people did in 1967.
Yeah, we'll see about it. It's interesting. Snowden turns out to be incredibly articulate and not a libertarian radical, actually. I'm way more radical than he is. He's like, he's like a constitutionalist who believes in, basic human rights and freedom. He doesn't have any kind of wild ideology or anything, which I'd be happy if he did, but he doesn't. He's living in flippin' Russia. This is unbelievable. He's safe from the U.S. government only because he's in Russia.
In a gulag.
This is an outrage. And he only did what Obama himself said he should have done during Obama's own campaign. The irony is penetrating and powerful and outrageous, really. And the other great thing about Snowden is he won't shut up. He keeps giving these interviews to everybody. He gave an interview to the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago that was absolutely mind-blowing. He charms every reporter who talks to him, and he makes, normal, good sense, actually. I'm so grateful for this man.
And the best part is he's, 30, 35? He's young, and so he's got, Lord willing, many, many decades more of just being a complete irritant to the United States power structure. Joe, what are your thoughts? Do you have thoughts? Do you have thoughts on the civil liberties?
I think I have thoughts.
Attaboy.
No, Jeffrey, I did want to ask you. I heard you on another podcast recently talking about Rand Paul, and through you had some familiarity you knew him maybe younger at a different time, and you seem to say that he was fairly sincere and that you thought he was on the right track, even though you had some disagreements with him. You spoke pretty kindly. He made a comment recently where he basically said that he would still have a sentence for Edward Snowden. I'm sure, obviously, especially with the comments that you just made, that you would disagree with that statement just a little bit. How does someone, if you and Rand Paul or a guy like Rand Paul are kind of moving the ball forward or kind of moving in the same direction, is there any place that you can kind of come to a reconciliation on something like Edward Snowden?
Yeah, so I feel like I have my role to play, and I think probably Rand Paul believes he has his role to play, and I don't think that that Rand would object to anything I said in this interview in the heart of hearts. I think he's very interested in getting the game going in the direction of liberty. I mean, he plays dangerously sometimes, to my mind, but that hardly makes him alone in the Senate. I mean, we got 100 pain in the necks up there. He's the one that every once in a while seems to take a brave stand for human liberty, even if sometimes he and often pulls back from what we would want. I think in the end he wants to be judged of whether or not he made a positive contribution and taking us in the right direction. So I guess I could say that unlike his most severe critics on the left and right, I kind of am inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm intrigued by his political intelligence. It's not my game, but it's one he wants to play, and I think he's playing it for reasons that are ultimately well-intended, I guess is the way I would put it.
All right, I got a... Oh.
Go ahead.
All right, I got a question that's strictly philosophical. Hope you don't mind. But libertarians often talk about the right to privacy, while passively collecting data about somebody is generally able to be done without any sort of force or coercion. So it seems that there's some sort of disparity there. Is there anything you'd like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that it is an interesting thing. I always get wary about these kind of forever manufacturing of new rights. I know that sometimes we use words like right to privacy or right to speech just as we know what we mean when we say that, but ultimately it doesn't really hold up under a rigorous test, and we only have the right to free speech if we're on private property and we're properly contracted to do that. In the same sense, we have no sort of God-given right for Facebook not to collect our browser history and shoot us ads based on that. So, I wouldn't say that's really a human right. We speak loosely about that term. What we really mean to say when throwing all these terms around like rights to this, rights to that, is what we want to say is the government should stop stealing my stuff and stop spying on me and stop trying to kill me and stop ruining my life. I mean, basically, that's what we mean by the assertion of all these rights.
Draft an amendment with those exact words immediately.
Nobody likes the government.
I know. Greg, not even the government, apparently, based on the statistics you gave earlier. Gregory Lenz.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a total what the McLaughlin group? Gregory Lenz.
Yeah. It was just actually to point back towards liberty.me. I think it's really interesting. Now, is the idea the central premise, is it more about trying to create more well-versed, already existing leaders within the liberty movement, or is it more about outreach and trying to, I guess, draw people in from the outside? What would you say is more of the central premise?
Well, as a commercial service, I definitely need to draw more people in. I mean, so one of the reasons I want to subject myself to this kind of profit and loss commercial society is that I think it's going to it's going to give off the signaling mechanisms that show us how we can reach more people, because the bigger we are, the better off we're going to be. And so I don't think, I'm tired of thinking strategically without a signaling mechanism. We need a North Star to chase, basically. In the nonprofit world, people are just sitting around going, what do you think we should do? Well, I don't agree. Well, here's what we should do. Well, I don't agree. Well, where's the test? Where's the market test? And I want to be subject to that market test. So it is evangelistic in that way. But also, I really do want to redirect a lot of the attention of the liberty movement away from factionalism, away from darkness and despair, over towards constructive solutions, cooperation, learning from each other, and civility, and building a new world of liberty to make the old world of the state obsolete. That's my actual goal. So yeah, I do have very much of an agenda here, and I want to see Liberty Me play a very big part in bringing that about. I think it's the right thing. I've thought about this a long time. I'm almost certain of it.
How
like an anarchist Moses.
Yeah. How Machiavellian of you.
Well, I would like to change, because I think it's good for people to start thinking about. By the way, I've been thinking a lot recently about Ayn Rand. Because the third Atlas movie is being made right now. It's being shot right now in Hollywood, because she's this continuing presence in our life. There's this constant, every generation that comes up reading Atlas Shrugged is thinking about her and her contribution. She made a really mighty contribution. When she set out to write that book, it had been proposed to her. She talked to her friends about the book. She didn't want to do it because she didn't want to just write some long theoretical harangue in favor of freedom. She wanted to come up with a story by which people, through their own lives and their own decisions and their exercise of their moral agency, were able to bring about real world change. And she didn't even start on the book until she could kind of figure out how this would work. She wanted a story that empowered people. And that's what that book does. Maybe all of you have read it. When you read it, whether you agree with the big philosophy and the big speeches or whatever or not, you do come away with a sense of walking taller, having a sense of, moral agency over your life, that you can do things. It doesn't matter. Nobody can stop you. You're going to forge ahead and achieve beautiful things in your life, regardless of what the government is doing to us. And I'd like to actually recapture that sensibility. I'm not sure anybody has done it as well as she did it. And I think if we can kind of tap into that a little bit more, we can propel us out to the new into a new era of liberty-mindedness that'll make what's happened to the past just seem irrelevant.
Well, that's really sort of the Glenn Beck theory, and I don't mean to offend, but Glenn Beck, his whole planned out future with the Blaze and with buying this major studio in Dallas, Texas, where not just for his TV station but also to create movies. He really wants to be the Disney of the next 50 years and beyond, because he wants to take conservative libertarian values and put them into culture. And by affecting culture, you can affect political change. And I tend to agree with that a little bit. I think, and when I worked for the Advocates for Self-Government, I recreated libertarianism.com and put a lot of time and thought into what will affect people. It's challenging people's beliefs. It's hitting them at an 8th grade reading level. I really love the Cato Institute. I love Learning Liberty. I love libertarianism.org. But a lot of their stuff is very professorial. And we tend to give people exactly what we think they need, as opposed to kind of responding to what they want. And I think that's a lot of what the libertarian movement needs to do. And part of it is just, it's the fact that we don't have the sheer numbers like Republicans or Democrats do to kind of do this stuff. Greg, what are your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. I'm not a big proponent. I've been in sales my whole life, and I'm not a huge proponent of education necessarily as being able to massively change minds quickly. I'm a big proponent on people who are susceptible, and we've had those conversations before. People who are already liberty-oriented and I guess you could say researching solutions for more liberty, they're the ones who are going to look for the articles, the blog posts. But the average Joe that is disengaged from politics, I feel like the more appropriate strategy, instead of going after them and educating them, is to ask them what they think. I think it's got to be more vanity, and I think
I totally agree.
Yeah, I just feel like if you ask the right questions and guide their thinking down the line, as long as you make it, and this is going to sound horrible, but a Machiavellian vanity play, you're going to change minds.
Well, it's just another way of saying that liberty has to have some relevance in people's lives. It can't just be a pure intellectual game. It's got to matter to people. It just has to. We've got to figure out the ways to do it. Actually, you mentioned changing culture. I like the idea of using the economic structures through entrepreneurship to change economic institutions, give people more tools to work around the state. I mean, I think Bitcoin represents a really great model of that, but there's so many others. Airbnb is a great thing for shredding zoning laws and hotel regulations, 3D printing is making mincemeat of patent regulations and regulations in general. To me, this is the way forward, not just through cultural change, but also through real-world entrepreneurship and economic change. And I agree, liberty has to have some meaning in our lives directly. It has to benefit us personally, really, in order to take off and be brilliant. I think Rand saw this. I think it's very interesting that so few since her time have really seen and understood this. We've turned liberty into just kind of a board game or an intellectual toy that we play with. And that's just not going to get us where we need to be.
Or even worse, we turn it into another team that we need to root for, and that's part of the problem. I think the team mentality of left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, that has truly destroyed conservative thought. I mean, we have a show here in Indianapolis called Chicks on the Right, and they couldn't be more shallow. I mean, they're perfectly nice ladies, but as far as intellectuals go, there's not a lot of grounding there. They just smear anybody who's not for their team.
I know.
You know, and
I remember this.
Yeah.
I remember the last time I thought that way, I was a junior in college.
Yeah.
I signed up and said, okay, I'm a Republican. Well, it lasted about 6 months, right? Because after a while, you begin to think, well, wait a minute. This is not the way I want to think. You know, as if I'm buying a candy out of a vending machine. You know, you just push the button and eat it. That's not serious. And yeah, party politics guts the mind, really. And it certainly, and also diverts lives, because people spend all their time trying to get, idiots elected rather than actually making any real change in the world. I mean, it's hard to believe to me that people keep going for the same trick over and over and over again. It's such an unbelievable waste of time.
Dan Peppers?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment in defense of education, because it seems like it's being attacked just a little bit right now.
Oh, no.
I'm being facetious when I say that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, my background with the Liberty movement is Young Americans for Liberty, and their motto was educate, train, mobilize. And one thing I've always said personally about education is the key to learning is repetition, the key to learning is repetition, the key to learning is repetition. And yes, you've got all these people. You'll remember that. But anyway, the thing is, yeah, there's only a certain number of people who are going to go out and seek this information. But that's why we need this echo chamber. We need an echo chamber that'll just keep repeating it so that people at least learn the rhetoric so that they can understand it on their own time.
Yeah, but part of the problem with that is that those people, the foot soldiers, lose the ability to critically think.
No, we're not talking about stripping anybody's critical thinking skills.
But when you're passing out talking points like the Republican Party does, they pass out. They actually send, and we learned this in an interview with Casey Hendrickson from the radio station that Joe works at. The RNC sends out the talking points to radio show hosts every day, and then you'll see those talking points used against us when we make a post on Facebook or Twitter like 12 hours later. I mean, it's once you hand out those talking points and you tell people what to think, people start to lose that critical thinking.
This is a poisoning the well fallacy, though, that you're bringing up. Just because it is used for that context doesn't mean it has to be. You can simply use that as a good way to summarize, and people do very well with summaries. That's why talking points have become so popular.
You know what? I don't like your attitude. Greg Lenz?
Well, I mean, no one likes... The thing is, no one likes to be sold anything.
Right.
No one does. You don't want me to come up and say, Dan, would you like to buy this car? It's got XYZ features and blah, 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 blah. What I need to figure out is what you need.
Yeah, is it better or cheaper than my car?
But what I actually need to figure out is what you need, what your needs are, and whatever solution I have within a Liberty framework, how those meet your needs and why they meet your needs better than any state solution.
Well, I'm talking from a law of large numbers perspective. If you cover every topic in its most basic form as many times as you possibly can, eventually the people who are receptive to those ideas will learn those ideas, and then they'll evaluate them on their own time, and then more than likely adopt them. I'm just saying that education as a process takes a lot of time. Hence why you spend 12 years learning essentially the same thing over and over again, and ideally you're supposed to learn something by the end of that.
True, but once you leave the idea is, like, we'll pick off a bunch of people by that. I agree. Young Americans for Liberty does a great job training leaders. They train the, I guess you could say, apparatchiks of liberty. But what they don't do is capture the disengaged. They never capture the Kardashian watcher. They never capture the Joe Sixpack. They never reach them because those people aren't in forums in areas where you can. What you can do, though, is ask people what they think. Everyone loves to be asked that. So you ask them, what are your beliefs? Why? There's a reason we still use the Socratic method today, and nobody is going to remember Karl Rove in 15 years.
Well, I'm not trying to insult the Socratic method. I'm just saying that if you're trying to boost your numbers, you've got to just make sure you've got these good points summarized so that you can very quickly answer these questions. You can it helps people really adapt the principles that they have in their head to real world situations. And I just think that overall, the idea of talking points, although they can be used for terrible purposes, I think that
it all comes
very handy.
It's not talking points that kill thinking. It's the thinker that kills thinking. So, see what I did there?
Beautiful.
It is what you do with the talking points. There's nothing wrong with people. What we here do on this podcast is we explain the current events in a very smart way. We talk through talking points and we sift through all the BS and we try to put it in a fun and presentable manner and an hour to 2 hours once a week. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And listen, you should never take anything we say seriously. You should always Google it right after you hear those facts. Not for our guests, though. Everything Jeffrey Tucker says is correct, right?
Yes.
That's right. And somebody asked me the other day what I thought about the idea of free will, and I said, I don't know. I'll have to Google that.
All right, on that note, let's move to the final bonus round here on We're Libertarians, where we give everyone an opportunity. We go around the table, ask them to get up on their soapbox. This is your chance to rant about anything we didn't talk about, maybe a point you didn't get out, shameless self-promotion. Anything is allowed in this final segment. To show Jeffrey Tucker how it's done, I'm going to ask Greg Lins to go.
Oh, Lord. Well, the only thing I have to add is, I don't know if you guys were following the news before we started today, but the Black Widow, she is from Dagestan in Russia. They believe she is on the loose in Sochi for the Olympics. They put out alerts all over. And if you think you're going to witness just how effective state surveillance can be, because I would bet anything there's going to be some sort of attack at the Olympics, and that place is on absolute lockdown. So there is almost nothing you can do to stop that type of event.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it could turn out to be a fairly... I'm hoping that... I love the Olympics. It's the time of the year. It's at the time of every 4 years, every 2 years, actually, when we get together for the Olympics, and the entire world just kind of... They have friendly competition as opposed to all the BS. And I don't want to see anything happen at the Olympics, but when you have somebody like Putin hosting the Olympics, somebody who is a cutthroat dictator, it isn't a great scenario. All right, Dan Peffers, would you like to get on your soapbox? Anything you'd like to mention, promote?
I'd like to tip my hand a little bit and mention that in the past I have engaged in piracy of sorts. And, I no longer do that, and it has nothing to do with... I've never felt that piracy was morally wrong, personally. I've never thought anything intellectual can be called property, and the reason I don't do it now is something that Mr. Jeffrey Tucker always cites, and that's the free market. The amount of work that has to go into maintaining a library on a hard drive is just astronomical. Things are always named in non-standard ways. File types are in non-standard formats. Well, for $8 a month, I can have Netflix do that for me, and that just saves me so much time. It saves me so much effort, and it doesn't have everything, but I don't need everything. I just need enough content to keep my interest. And there's a lot of competition too. There's Netflix, there's Hulu, there's Crackle, there's iTunes, and on top of that, the old cable model seems to be falling. Back in the day, and South Park did a very good job of pointing this out, if you go to a cable company, you buy a bundle, and you've got to buy whatever is in that bundle. Now it's my choice whether I have Netflix or not, or Crackle or not, or Hulu or not.
Yeah, I think I'm in total agreement. What is your time worth? And I just at a certain point got to the point where, like, listen, it's just easier to download it to iTunes, keep it stored in iTunes Cloud, or keep it in my physical CD. And the CD, I never have to worry about the quality. It's always going to be high quality, and I'm probably not going to lose it.
I hate CDs.
Yeah, well, I mean, they take up space. Ew. But
it's disgusting.
I just don't think piracy is worth it anymore. So, Joe Ruiz, please stand up on your soapbox and be acknowledged.
Well, I want to plug my podcast, but real quick, it's funny that Peppers, we're kind of tiptoeing around piracy. And Jeff, didn't you publish something in one of your books about how, downloading music and movies essentially forced the recording and movie industry into iTunes, or Apple into iTunes? Like it was kind of a forced innovation of the market because people were utilizing that as a way to get those things?
Yeah, and not only that, but Netflix itself relies on piracy today to decide what it's going to shell out for the next movies that it's going to show and make available. Because they have to pay all these ridiculous royalty rights and everything. So, I mean, piracy is massively benefiting the world today. It's a huge boon to everybody, from movie makers to music distributors, even tennis shoe makers. Nike will produce, 350 new models this year. And the ones that it goes into hyperdrive in production are the ones that are most pirated, and they watch this very, very carefully. So piracy is performing a very important social function around the world today. So here's to the pirates of the world. You're saving free enterprise.
Cheers. And yeah, other than that, I just wanted to say that We Are Libertarians, or the Wall Radio Network, now has an official arts and culture podcast, the CAP, Culture and Arts Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at CA Podcast. And it's something we're doing. It's completely non-political, but just to give people a break from political talks when they want it. We're more likely to discuss, something going on in People magazine than we are in the New York Times.
Breaking news, Justin Bieber's wiener. What are your thoughts?
You.
Yeah, I got to be honest. Listen, I'm not one to doubt Joe. I love Joe to death, but every time you get a new podcast and you listen to the first episode, you just go, okay, you hit play at the very beginning and go, please be good, please be good, please be good. And I did that with Joe's podcast too, because you don't want to go back to Joe and say, listen, buddy, I love you to death, but your podcast was terrible. That didn't happen here. The exact opposite happened. I was engaged. Joe is a far better host than I on hosting a podcast, which that made me angry too. It just was crazy. It's crazy how good this podcast is. So go to iTunes, look up The Cap, C-A-P, that's how you spell that, and you can find Joe's podcast and listen to how much of a better host at podcasting he is than I. Greg?
Now, Joe, are you still taking applications so people can actually follow you on Twitter? Because I know you've been blocking people like left and right.
I know, it's such an
That wasn't me, that was Twitter. They said that there was some sort of spam something or another, and I had to re-log in before they would allow me to accept followers.
Not a practicer of voluntarism, folks.
Yeah.
Not a practicer.
He used the non-aggression principle against the owner of the network. I tried to follow my own new podcast, and I couldn't do it. Jeffrey Tucker, it is your turn to get up on the soapbox. Please depart with some wisdom or something profound or whatnot.
Okay, this is not profound. It's just an unbelievable annoyance. I am fed up with New York Times articles on healthcare. I can't stand it anymore. They're so uncomprehending, filled with vast detail, anecdotal information, sad, sad stories of irrationality, inefficiency, and chaos and pricing nonsense and scandals, and they never have the slightest clue as to why this is going on. They will publish 5,000 words of sadness and misery in the realm of healthcare without even one word trying to analyze any relationship of cause and effect. And I am just fed up with it. This is not a market, and the reason it's not working well is because it's not a market. There's a reason why I can go down the street a mile and order a brilliant hamburger with everything I want on it for like $5 and get a beautiful bottle of wine to go with it and get everything I want, and the prices are like falling, and they're falling all over me as in customer service, and I get everything I want. But if I get sick, I get trapped into this labyrinth bureaucracy of chaos and priceless information and ripoffs and scams. Okay, the reason is that one is a market and one is a government-imposed, bureaucratic, broken system because of third-party providers and welfare and everything else. So what the hell is wrong with the New York Times? They can't see this. And why are we constantly being denied any kind of analysis of cause and effect? I mean, the implication of every one of these articles is that we need a better government plan. I mean, can we really say that anymore after Obamacare? I mean, really? Can we really say that we need an ever better, greater government plan? So that's my rant for today. I believe that the market will solve all human problems worth solving, or that can be solved, actually, and government can solve none of them. And healthcare is not exempt from this force. And I'm fed up with people that in the 21st century fail to even have a glimmer of that truth at all.
Should we learn the lesson of that and use emotion to help promote liberty and use those anecdotal evidence, or should we demand that they use factual arguments?
Well, I was just finishing up an article. The reason I'm thinking about this, I mean, I'm using exactly the same information the New York Times used in this article that appeared today or yesterday or whatever, and just comparing it with the fast food industry and explaining, what the story is. I mean, this is all a matter of enlightenment. By the way, we're going to get a market in healthcare one way or another. It's going to take a lot of breaking bad, a lot of doctors leaving the system, people bailing out of their company-provided healthcare, but we are going to get a market one way or the other. The system is breaking down. And this is essentially another reason why I wanted to have, why I started liberty.me. I think we're entering into a world where we're all going to have to live without the state, and we all need to help each other in this transitional process to live in a kind of a stateless world. The state will continue to exist, but it won't do anything for us. We have to do everything for ourselves, and it's going to be a bit of a struggle, but if we're creative, optimistic, and hopeful, we can reinvent the world, as Thomas Paine always said we could. I think we can.
All right, well, my final thought is to, number one, ask you to go to liberty.me, support Jeffrey Tucker in his venture. It's very important. I think that it's something that really can be a game changer, that can be a great help. If you're somebody who feels like you have a writer hidden inside of you, if you have thoughts that you're throwing out onto Facebook that are getting lost forever, copy and paste or switch to liberty.me altogether, or do what you ought to do, which is get on Google+, on Tumblr, on Twitter, on Facebook, on liberty.me, and post it everywhere. Put your thoughts in as many places as possible, as long as they're good. Hey, that never stopped us, did it, Craig Lentz?
Absolutely not.
Secondly, I forget what I was going to say.
Was it about how he should auction off a date with Libertarian Girl in order to go break the fundraising record?
You're being inappropriate. One final thought.
Marianne's so sweet. She's just fantastic, I was on we were on a staff meeting the other day because we have these staff meetings, and I've now got a fairly big group of contract employees and things, and she's kind of doing some work for us. So she showed up. I hope she doesn't mind my telling this, but she showed up in this Google Hangout with all of us, and everybody knows that she's beautiful, right? But she has a parrot on her shoulder. And she's gently feeding this parrot, look like carrots. There could have been Cheetos. And she'd hold it out, and the parrot would lift up his foot and grab it and start, shoving it in his mouth. It was the most funny staff meeting I've ever been in my life. I just couldn't stop laughing. It was so funny.
Was there an eye patch to go along with the parrot?
She should have had an iPad. It was just, I don't know if she, I mean, maybe she knows how amusing she is, but I could barely pay attention to any of the content of this meeting.
It's fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us here on We Are Libertarians. We appreciate every time you come on. I think we all learn a lot, and I hope our audience does as well. If you got a lot out of this, and Walter Block I thought was fantastic last week as well. These 2 episodes I think have been stellar. Please share them with your friends. Please send them out to your friends so they can hear these ideas. And we'd greatly appreciate it. And then ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And we would love to hear from you on anything that, if you have questions, if you have comments. Greg got a very nice comment. People like to hear him talk history. It was the first nice comment that you've gotten since you've been on the podcast.
Ever.
Very nice Twitter comment. So thank you to, I think it was Corey.
At Arcon14.
Yeah, so follow that guy because he's a hero to Greg Lenz.
A great American.
Please share the podcast, spread this with your friends, and thank you, Jeffrey Tucker, for joining us.
Thank you, dear friends. Appreciate it so much. Thanks for having me.
And I'd say this has been an excellent podcast, but there's always room for growth. So next time, we promise
to do better next time.